Story number 1, Warehouse 6. I arrived at the warehouse at 0600 hours on the morning of August 9th to conduct the routine quarterly audit of seized assets stored in climate-controlled Vault 3. The facility sat 20 minutes outside Boise proper, a prefabricated structure surrounded by chain, link, and administrative signage. I had completed this same audit cycle for the past 4 years without incident. The vault required 2-factor authentication and a manual logbook entry. I signed in, verified the environmental controls were within acceptable parameters, and began the physical count of items logged between March and May. The process was straightforward. I moved down each aisle with my tablet, scanning barcodes and confirming placement against the digital inventory system. At approximately 0715, I reached aisle D and noticed that lot number 4729 had been moved from its documented position at shelf C12 to shelf D18. The lot consisted of 11 antique mirrors from an estate seizure in Meridian, catalogued following the execution of a federal warrant in April. The documentation indicated no authorized transfer. The items should not have been relocated without updated records and supervisory approval. I followed standard protocol and cross-referenced the digital inventory system. The system showed no record of the transfer. According to the database, lot 4729 remained at shelf position C12. I walked back to aisle C and confirmed the shelf space was empty. I returned to aisle D and verified the physical presence of the mirrors. The discrepancy was clear. I began photographing the lot for my report. The mirrors were ornate, varying in size from approximately 18 inches to 4 feet in height. They had been wrapped in protective foam and stored upright in a reinforced crate. Several had been partially unwrapped, though my documentation showed they had been properly secured during intake processing. While framing a photograph of the largest mirror, I noticed that my reflection appeared to lag behind my actual movements. I lowered my tablet and raised my hand. My reflection completed the motion approximately 3 seconds later. I repeated the action. The delay remained consistent. I immediately stepped back from the shelf and sealed the aisle with caution tape from my equipment kit. I attempted to contact my supervisor using both his office line and mobile device. Neither call connected. This was unusual, as quarterly audit days were scheduled weeks in advance and required supervisory availability for exactly this type of situation. I returned to the aisle entrance and observed the mirrors from a distance of approximately 12 feet. I could see my reflection in 3 of them from that position. The delay had increased. I estimated 5 seconds, then 8. I remained still, but my reflections continued to move. They turned their heads. They adjusted their stance. One reflection raised its hand to shield its eyes, though the overhead lighting had not changed. I watched my reflection in the largest mirror turn fully toward the vault door. I had not moved. I was standing with my back to the door, facing the mirrors. The reflection was showing me an action I had not performed. At 0741, I made the decision to violate containment protocol. I entered the aisle, removed each mirror from the shelf system, and covered them with opaque seizure tarps from the supply cabinet. The action was not authorized under standard procedures for anomalous evidence, but I determined that continued observation presented an unacceptable risk to audit integrity. Covering the mirrors stopped the temporal discrepancy. I could no longer see any reflections. The facility's unauthorized handling alarm activated immediately. The alarm system was designed to detect removal of items from their logged positions without prior digital authorization. My supervisor arrived at 0823. I provided a verbal summary of the discrepancy, the unauthorized relocation of the lot, and the reflection anomaly. He did not ask follow-up questions. He instructed me to complete the audit report, listing the mirrors as damaged during storage and recommended for disposal under standard asset degradation protocols. I asked whether the reflection delay should be documented separately. He said it should not. He told me to finish the audit and submit the report by end of business. He left the vault at 0837. I completed the remaining inventory count without further incident. I logged lot 4729 as damaged and submitted the audit report at 1400 hours. I did not include any reference to the temporal discrepancy or the unauthorized relocation in the final documentation. 5 days later, I received automated notification that lot 4729 had been transported to an off-site facility and incinerated in accordance with disposal procedures for unsalvageable seized assets. The notification included no additional details. On August 23rd, I was informed that my quarterly audit report had been reclassified from routine documentation to restricted access. I was instructed to direct any inquiries about the audit to my supervisor. No inquiries were made. On September 4th, I was reassigned to paper records processing in the Boys Field office basement. The reassignment was described as temporary, pending a review of vault staffing allocations. I have not been scheduled for vault duties since. My security clearance for climate-controlled storage areas was suspended on September 18th without explanation. I continue to process paper records. The assignment involves digitizing archived case files from 1997 through 2004. The work is scheduled to continue for approximately 18 months. I have submitted no requests for transfer or clarification. The incident is closed. Story number 2, Fire Tower 9. I arrived at Prospect Tower on the morning of April 9th for what should have been a routine early season rotation. The access road was still partially snowbound, and I had to hike the last mile and a half with my gear. This was my third season with the Forest Service, and I'd completed certification in fire behavior analysis the previous autumn. The tower itself was in acceptable condition, though the logbook showed no entries since the previous October. I performed the standard equipment check, confirmed radio contact with the Packwood Dispatch Center, and logged my arrival at 10:15 in the morning. The first 2 days passed without incident. Weather remained clear with moderate temperatures. Snowmelt was running heavier than typical for early April, particularly in the western drainage basins. But this fell within reportable parameters rather than emergency conditions. I maintained the standard observation schedule and recorded conditions every 2 hours as required. On April 11th, during the 1400 sweep, I observed smoke in grid sector 12. The column appeared thin but distinct through the binoculars, rising from a point approximately 3 miles northwest of my position. When I lowered the binoculars to verify with naked eye observation, I could not locate the smoke. I raised the binoculars again, and the column was clearly visible in the same location. I repeated this process 4 times with identical results. I radioed Packwood Dispatch at 1420 and provided the coordinates. The dispatcher confirmed receipt and stated she would check satellite thermal imaging. She returned my call at 14:35 and reported no thermal signatures in that sector. She logged the observation as probable atmospheric distortion caused by temperature differential over snowmelt. I acknowledged and continued standard monitoring. The smoke column remained visible through magnification for the rest of that day. It did not spread or intensify. At 1800 I reported its continued presence to dispatch. The evening dispatcher, a different voice, confirmed the information and stated that ground crews were occupied with a controlled burn in the southern district. I was instructed to continue observation and report any changes. On April 12th, the column was still present in the same location. At 0900 I radioed an update to dispatch. The dispatcher responded by repeating my exact words from the previous day's 1400 call, including my phrasing and speech patterns. The voice was my own. I asked for confirmation of receipt. The dispatcher repeated my question back to me in my voice, then resumed normal communication in her own voice and logged the report as received. I noted the radio anomaly in the logbook and checked all equipment connections that afternoon. Everything appeared secure and functional. While I was inside the tower cabin, I reviewed the logbook and found 3 entries from April 10th that I did not remember writing. The handwriting was mine. The entries described routine observations that matched my actual memory of that day, but I had no recollection of writing those specific lines. The smoke column remained in position on April 13th. It had not moved or changed in 3 days. At 1100 I noticed it was no longer rising vertically. The column was tilting, angling toward the east. The wind readings showed westerly flow at 8 miles per hour. The smoke was moving directly against the wind. I documented this and attempted to radio dispatch. The transmission went through, but the response was my own voice reading back my April 11th report word for word. I waited and tried again at 1200. Normal communication resumed. The dispatcher logged my report and stated that a crew would be dispatched to investigate the coordinates when personnel became available. By 1500 the smoke column had traveled approximately 1 mile upslope in a perfectly straight line. It was now visible in grid sector 9. The movement was steady and uniform, showing no variation in speed or direction. I could track its progress through the binoculars. With the naked eye, I still saw nothing. On April 14th, I woke at 0530 to find the smoke column at the edge of the clearing, roughly 200 yards from the tower base. It rose from the tree line in a narrow vertical stream. At 0615, I observed a figure standing beside the column. Through the binoculars, I could see it was wearing a dark green jacket identical to the spare Forest Service jacket I kept in the storage locker inside the cabin. I went inside to verify. The jacket was hanging on its hook where I had left it. I returned to the observation platform. The figure was still visible through the binoculars, standing motionless at the clearing's edge. I could not see a face. The proportions seemed correct for a human form, but something in the stance or posture was not right. I watched it for 20 minutes. It did not move. I did not descend from the tower. Protocol required me to maintain position unless directly threatened or ordered to evacuate. I had received no such orders. I continued standard observations and logged weather conditions every 2 hours. The figure remained at the clearing's edge throughout the day. I did not approach it. At 1800, I attempted radio contact with dispatch to request instructions. My transmission was answered by a recording of my own voice describing routine conditions from April 9th. I did not attempt further radio contact that evening. I remained on the observation platform through the night. I did not sleep. The figure was not visible in darkness, but I maintained watch on the clearing. At 0430 on April 15th, first light revealed the clearing was empty. The smoke column was gone. I performed a visual sweep of all grid sectors and found no smoke in any location. At 0700 I established normal radio contact with Packwood Dispatch. The dispatcher showed no knowledge of any previous anomalies and confirmed that all my reports had been properly logged. I completed my remaining rotation days without further incident. Weather remained clear. Snowmelt continued heavy but manageable. I descended from Prospect Tower on April 23rd as scheduled. I filed a standard end of rotation report citing possible equipment malfunction and recommended carbon monoxide testing of the cabin heating system. I made no mention of the smoke column or the figure in the clearing. On May 4th, I received notification that Prospect Tower had been closed for the season pending structural assessment. My assignment was transferred to ground crew operations in District 7. The tower logbook and all associated records were archived under administrative review. No further explanation was provided. Story number 3, Processing Center. I arrived at the Heartland Processing Facility in Sedalia at 9:30 in the morning for a routine quarterly sanitation inspection following a minor citation from the previous year. The citation had been for improper temperature logging in one of the chill rooms, nothing that suggested systemic problems. I expected to spend 3 hours on site, complete the checklist, and file the report by end of business. The plant manager met me at the loading dock instead of the main office, explaining that the administrative building was temporarily closed due to a ventilation issue. He was a man in his 50s named Gerald Prout, who had managed the facility for 8 years, according to our records. He seemed calm, but insisted we enter through the rear to avoid the affected area. I noted the deviation from standard procedure, but saw no immediate reason to object. During the walk through of the cutting floor, I noticed all the drainage grates had been recently welded shut, which violated state code. The grates are required to remain accessible for cleaning and inspection. When I pointed this out, Prout insisted they had passed a county inspection 2 weeks prior, and that the welds were temporary measures approved by a county engineer, whose name he could not recall. I made a note to verify this claim against county records. The cutting floor itself was clean, well lit, and operating within acceptable temperature ranges. The workers wore proper protective equipment and followed glove change protocols I observed during a 15-minute stationary check. In the refrigerated storage area, I found approximately 40 sides of beef, hanging with identification tags that used a numbering system not matching any USDA or state format I had encountered in 11 years of fieldwork. The tags were laminated plastic, pale blue, with 7-digit codes that did not correspond to standard lot tracking. I had worked in 4 districts across Missouri and reviewed documentation from every major processor in the central region. The format was wrong. When I asked Prout about the system, he said it was part of a pilot program coordinated with a private distributor and that all the paperwork had been filed with the state office in Jefferson City. I told him I would need to see that documentation. He nodded and left to retrieve the files from a storage office on the upper level. He did not return for over an hour. I waited in the cold storage area for 20 minutes, then walked back to the cutting floor to look for him. The floor supervisor, a younger man whose name I did not catch, said Prout had gone upstairs and had not come back down. I tried calling Prout's office line from the wall-mounted phone near the equipment lockers. No one answered. I left the cutting floor and went looking for the administrative areas myself. I proceeded alone to the lower processing level, following signs for additional cold storage. The stairwell was older than the rest of the facility, with concrete walls that showed water staining and metal railings spotted with rust. At the bottom, I found a corridor with 4 cold storage units labeled A through D. I checked the facility blueprints I had brought with me in my inspection binder. Only 4 units were listed. But at the end of the corridor, past Unit D, there was a 5th door. It was unmarked, painted the same industrial gray as the others, but secured with a chain system and a padlock that looked new. I returned to my vehicle and retrieved the bolt cutters I carry for emergency access situations. When I came back down, the corridor was still empty. I cut the chain and pulled the door open. The cold air that came out was sharper than in the other units, enough to make my eyes water. Inside, I observed hanging product that appeared anatomically inconsistent with any livestock species under my jurisdiction. There were 12 sections suspended from ceiling, mounted hooks, each wrapped partially in opaque plastic sheeting. The portions that were visible did not match the skeletal structure, musculature, or connective tissue patterns of cattle, swine, sheep, or poultry. The proportions were wrong. I have seen thousands of carcasses in processing environments. I know how they hang, how the joints align, how the tissue layers separate. What I saw in that room did not follow those patterns. I took 3 photographs with the camera issued by the department. I did not approach the hanging sections. I left the unit, closed the door, and went directly back to my vehicle. I immediately contacted my district supervisor, Raymond Kowalski, from my cell phone in the parking lot. I described what I had found in clear terms, keeping my voice level. Kowalski listened without interrupting. When I finished, he told me to leave the premises, surrender all photographic evidence, and file no written report through standard channels. He said someone from the central office would contact me within 72 hours. He told me not to discuss the inspection with anyone, including other department staff. I asked if I should flag the facility in the database. He said no. I asked if I should submit my inspection binder. He said to leave it in my vehicle and await further instructions. The call lasted 4 minutes. I left the Heartland processing facility at 2:10 in the afternoon. I did not see Prout again. No one from the facility attempted to contact me as I drove away. 2 days later, a man who identified himself as a compliance coordinator from the central office met me at a rest stop outside of Marshall. He took my camera, my inspection binder, and my written notes. He did not provide a receipt or a case number. He told me the matter was being handled through a separate review process, and that my involvement was concluded. 3 days after the original inspection, I was reassigned to grain elevator inspections in the Northeastern District without explanation or review. The reassignment notice came through internal mail with no accompanying memo. My new supervisor was someone I had never worked with. When I asked about the reason for the transfer, I was told it was part of a routine district rebalancing. I checked the state database 6 weeks later. The Heartland processing facility license was listed as active with no notes or flags. I checked again 4 months afterward. The license was listed as voluntarily surrendered, with the closure date recorded as 3 weeks after my inspection. No enforcement action was recorded. No fines, no hearings, no follow-up inspections. The facility status was marked as inactive, and the property records showed a transfer to a holding company I did not recognize. I have not returned to Sedalia. I remain assigned to grain elevator inspections. My personnel file contains no reference to the Heartland processing facility or the inspection I conducted there. The photographs I took no longer exist in any archive I can access,